Hello Daily Drafters and welcome to the Outlaws of Thunder Junction limited archetype guide here on the Daily Draft channel. This video will cover all of the limited archetypes, key cards, synergies, and more so that you can effectively prepare for your first draft of the new set when it releases on MTG Arena on Tuesday, April the 16th. Saddle up as we take a deep dive into the Wild West. Before we look at our first archetype for this video, let's go over the new and returning mechanics for this set so we have an idea what we're dealing with. And we're going to dive right in with a new keyworded action that fits right in our new setting, and that is committing a crime. You commit a crime as you cast a spell, activate an ability, or put a triggered ability on the stack that targets anything to do with your opponent. Themselves, a spell or ability they control, a permanent they control, a card in their graveyard, and so on. Several cards in this set will reference committing crimes, and as long as you've done any one of these things, you have committed a crime this turn. As an example, Raven of Fell Omens is a common 1/2 flyer that drains your opponent every time you commit a crime, limited to once each turn. Our next new mechanic is Spree. Spree is a new keyword found on several modal cards in this set. In order to cast a spell with Spree, you must first pay the cost listed in the top right hand corner of the card, as you do with every Magic card, but you may then choose any number of additional costs listed below to have the spell gain those effects. Think of it like Kicker, but you get multiple different options to kick. You can choose any number of the various effects, including all of them if you can afford it, but you may not choose any mode more than once. Jailbreak Scheme is a single blue mana for a sorcery with Spree that gives you the option to cast a spell for 3 and a blue that puts 1/1/1 counter on a creature and then gives it unblockable until end of turn, or you could cast it as 2 and a blue that puts an artifact or creature on the top or bottom of its owner's library, and you can also cast this card as 5 and a blue to get both effects that resolve in the order printed on the card. Our next new mechanic is very thematic to the Wild West, and that is the existence of mounts and saddles. Mount is a new creature type that doesn't have any specific rules associated with it. It's just most likely the location to find the new ability, Saddle. Saddle is an activated ability that you activate as a sorcery by tapping any number of untapped creatures you control other than the creature with Saddle, with total power N or more, where N is the number included in the Saddle keyword. As the ability resolves, the mount becomes saddled until end of turn. This will usually come with bonus effects and abilities. Think of Saddle as a combination of Crew and Enlist, for those of you familiar with those two mechanics. Crewing turns on your vehicles just like saddling activates your mounts, and this is effectively the same as Enlist, but now the creature that saddles does not have to be free of summoning sickness. You can use a creature to saddle a mount that was played this turn. Bridled Bighorn is a 4 mana 3/4 creature with Vigilance that has Saddle 2, and whenever it attacks while saddled, it creates a 1/1 sheep token. Our last new mechanic for this set is Plot. Plot is a new keyword that allows you to pay a cost upfront and exile a card from your hand, and then the card becomes plotted. On a future turn, you may cast a plotted card from exile without paying its mana cost. This is a way to set up a future turn by allowing you to double spell or gain additional effects from casting a card for free or from exile, and so on. Think of Plot like Foretell from Call Time for those of you that were playing then, except now the plotted card is exiled face up, so your opponent does have the ability to see it coming, but the benefit for you is that now the spell will be free when you choose to cast it. Spinewood's Paladin is a 5 mana 5/4 with Trample that gains you 3 life when it enters, but you can also plot it for 4 mana and then cast it on a later turn for free. Lastly, several cards in this set refer to Outlaws. An Outlaw is a permanent type with one or more of the following creature types: Assassin, Mercenary, Pirate, Rogue, and Warlock. You'll often see abilities that refer to an outlaw in some form or fashion, and it is simply referring to creatures with one of these 5 types. If you're looking for a detailed breakdown of what Outlaws of Thunder Junction play booster packs will look like, and boy is it a lot of information this time around, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and tune back in on Monday to check out my pre-release guide for this set, where I will go over the details of what the draft experience and booster pack collation will look like this time around. Alright, with that look at the mechanics out of the way, let's get to the archetype guides. But before we do, if you do enjoy this content or any other content on the channel and would like to give back, I do have a Patreon with a link in both the description and on your screen now. For those of you that don't know, Patreon is a great way to give back to creators that provide you with content that you enjoy, and mine is no different, except for the fact that my Patreon is among the most affordable Patreons in the entire Magic community. I only have two tiers available for either $1 per month or $3 per month. Like, that's it. Less than a daily cup of coffee for a whole month. There's also absolutely no expectation of commitment either, as it is a come and go as you please system. You can support for 1 month and then discontinue and then rejoin later. It's completely up to you. Support on Patreon helps keep the lights on here at Daily Draft, and if you enjoy the content I make and would like to pay it forward, feel free to check it out and throw a couple bucks my way. Thanks so much for your consideration. With that out of the way, let's dive into the main event in today's video, the Archetype Guides. I'll now go ahead and run through all 10 color pairs that exist in Outlaws of Thunder Junction, what the decks care about, their themes, some of the key commons and uncommons for the archetype, and even some rares and mythics that can pull you into the deck as well. And we will begin with Red-White, which is yet another aggressive deck this time around, but this time focused around mercenary tokens. Wizards also announced recently that we will now be receiving 2 signpost uncommons for each archetype, so let's take a look at our first one for Red-White with Eartha Joe Frontier Mentor, which is a 4-mana 2/4 creature that creates a mercenary token when it enters and even doubles up all the mercenary token activations that you'll be stacking up. Our second signpost uncommon is a simple one, Form a Posse, and all it does is create X mercenary tokens for X, a red, and a white. Let's first take a look at a few cards that either create mercenary tokens or are mercenaries themselves, beginning with Prickly Pear, which is a 3-mana 2/2 that comes with a mercenary token. Wanted Griffin is a 4-mana 3/2 flyer that makes a mercenary token when it dies. Sterling Keykeeper is a mercenary that can continually tap down creatures your opponents control. Lassoed by the Law is a removal spell that also comes with a mercenary token. And Omenport Vigilante is a 2-mana mercenary that can gain double strike if you've committed a crime this turn. Some of the payoffs and synergies we get access to in this archetype at common and uncommon include Stagecoach Security, which gives all of your creatures a buff and vigilance when it enters the battlefield, and ideally you've gone wide enough to take advantage of the trigger. Sheriff of Safe Passage enters the battlefield as a bigger creature the more creatures you have as you cast it. And Prosperity Tycoon makes a mercenary token and also has an ability that lets you sacrifice tokens to give itself indestructible until end of turn. Some rares and mythics that might pull you into this deck include Claim Jumper, which is a 3-mana 3/3 with upside in the event that your opponent has more lands on the battlefield than you. Hellspur Posse Boss is a 4-mana 2/4 that comes with 2 mercenary tokens and gives those mercenaries and all other outlaws you play haste. And Bruce Tarl, Roving Ranger, gives you some nice little impulsive card draw, or a creature with double strike when it enters the battlefield or attacks. Next up we have Blue-White, which cares about not casting spells on your turn. There are multiple ways to do this in the set, but it seems as if Plot is the main enabler for this archetype. Our first signpost uncommon is Gem Lightfoot, Sky Explorer, which is a 4-mana 3/3 flyer that draws you a card every time you don't cast a spell on your turn. A pretty enticing payoff. Our other signpost uncommon is Wrangler of the Damned, which is a 1/4 that creates 2/2 flyers on your end step if you haven't cast a spell this turn. As I said, I think that plot cards will likely be the best enabler for this deck, so let's take a look at a few of those, as well as a couple of instants, beginning with Sheriff of Safe Passage, which can plot for just 2 mana, and comes in later after you've built up your board as a larger threat. Stagecoach Security plots for 4 mana and can buff your whole team when it enters later in the game. Take Up the Shield is a great instant speed protection spell and combat trick for just 2 mana. And Plan the Heist plots for 4 mana and can refill your hand later in the game after you've deployed all of your threats. What sort of payoffs do we have for not casting spells on our turn? Inventive Wingsmith can permanently gain flying if you choose to not cast a spell on your turn. Prairie Dog gets a counter every time you pass the turn without casting a spell. Emergent Haunting permanently becomes a 3/3 flyer the first time you don't cast a spell on your turn. And Canyon Crab lets you loot every time you choose to pass the turn. Some rares and mythics that might pull you into this archetype include Aven Interrupter, which is a 3 mana 2/2 flyer with flash that taxes your opponent's plot spells. 3 Steps Ahead is a cheap modal instant that can counter a spell, make copies of tokens, and or draw some cards. And Stoic Sphinx is a 5/3 flyer with flash that has hexproof as long as you haven't cast a spell this turn, and that counts both your turn and your opponent's. Next up we have Red Black, which in this set is an Outlaw deck. Remember, Outlaws are any creatures with the creature types of Warlock, Rogue, Assassin, Mercenary, or Pirate. Our first signpost for this deck is at Knife Point, which gives all of your Outlaws first strike on your turn and creates a Mercenary token every time you commit a crime. This deck also gets access to Vile Smasher Gleeful Grenadier, which is a 2-mana 3/2 that pings your opponent for 1 damage every time another outlaw enters the battlefield under your control. Now, there are obviously tons of outlaw creatures in this set, but a few at common and uncommon in these colors include Discerning Peddler, which is a cheap rogue that rummages when it enters the battlefield. Forsaken Miner is a rogue that can return itself to the battlefield every time you commit a crime. Prickly Pear is a mercenary that creates yet another mercenary when it enters, 2 outlaws for the price of 1. And Nezumi Linkbreaker is a warlock that dies into a mercenary, yet again, 2 outlaws for the price of 1. What are some of the payoffs for putting all these outlaws in your deck? Boneyard Desecrator is a creature that can sacrifice other creatures for counters, and if those creatures happen to be outlaws, you get additional treasure tokens. Rakish Crew drains your opponent for 1 life every time an outlaw you control dies. Hellspur Brute has affinity for outlaws, and could be as cheap as a single red mana for a 5/4 with trample. Outlaw's Fury is a board pump effect that gives you impulsive card draw if you control an outlaw as it resolves. And Mine Raider is a 3-mana 3/2 with trample that makes a treasure token when it enters if you control another outlaw. Some rares and mythics that might pull you into this deck include Hellspur Posse Boss, which gives all of your outlaws haste and creates 3 outlaws for 1 card when it enters the battlefield. Rakdos the Muscle is a 5-mana 6/5 with flying and trample that has a wall of text that I won't read, but I promise you it's all upside. And Laughing Jasper Flint makes all of your creatures outlaws and lets you steal what could be a ton of spells off of the top of your opponent's library. Next up we have Red Green, which gets a theme that we've seen before but has never really been entirely successful, and that is caring about creatures with power 4 or greater. Our first signpost uncommon for the deck is Cactus Folk Sure Shot, which is a 4-mana 4/4 with reach and ward 2 that also gives all of your other creatures with power 4 or greater trample and haste. We also get Jolene Plundering Pugilist, which is a 3-mana 4/2 that gives you a treasure token every time you attack with a creature with power 4 or greater, and can turn treasures into direct damage. Now, what good would this theme be without access to, well, creatures with power 4 or greater? So let's take a look at a few, beginning with Gila Courser, which is a 3-mana 4/2 that has the ability to saddle up to give you some impulsive card draw. Drover Grizzly is another 3-mana 4/2 that can give your whole team trample when saddled. Giant Beaver is a 4-mana 4/4 with vigilance that can also buff your other creatures by saddling up. Spinewood's Armadillo is our big expensive creature for the set, but also has the buyout of paying 2 mana to get a land from your deck and gain 3 life. And Quilled Charger is a 4-mana 4/3 that can become a 5/5 with menace when it attacks if you saddle it. We've got a few payoffs at common and uncommon for this archetype, so let's begin with Beast Bond Outcaster, which draws a card when it enters the battlefield if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. Scalestorm Summoner creates a 3/1 dinosaur when it attacks if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. And Bristlepack Sentry is a 2-mana 3/3 with Defender that can attack as long as you control a creature with power 4 or greater. Some rares and mythics that might pull you into this archetype include Terror of the Peaks, which really doesn't need any sort of help to be amazing, but this might be its best home. Bristly Bill Spine Sower can grow some of your small creatures into larger creatures just by playing lands. And Outcaster Trailblazer draws you a card every single time another creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield on your side. Next up we have Black Green, which once again gets the theme of, well, graveyard stuff. A theme that is always difficult to pull off, but this time it's focused around the theme of recurring things out of your graveyard. Our first signpost uncommon to help us out here is Badlands Revival, which is a 5-mana sorcery that can reanimate a creature and also get another permanent card back from your graveyard to your hand. Usually we pay 5 mana for this reanimate effect, so the extra permanent is just gravy here. We also get Honest Rutstein, which is a 3-mana 3/2 creature that gets back a creature to your hand when it enters and also gives you a mana discount on your creatures. In order to be recurring things from our graveyard, we need a way to put things there. So we have cards like Desperate Bloodseeker, which has the ability to mill yourself for 2 cards when it enters if you would like. Patient Naturalist mills 3 cards on ETB and can return a land from among them or make you a treasure token. And Neutralize the Guards is an effect that usually is not great in Limited, but it has Surveil 2 tacked on as well to help you with filling your graveyard. We do have access to plenty of ways to recur these things from our graveyard, so let's begin with Forsaken Miner, which can do it itself as long as you've committed a crime this turn. Lively Dirge can reanimate 2 creatures to the battlefield for 5 mana, and even has the mode to tutor up a card to put in your graveyard for a little bit more. Mourner's Surprise can return a creature from your graveyard to your hand for 2 mana and make a mercenary token for your troubles. And Rise of the Varmints can make a 2/1 Varmint token for every creature card in your graveyard. A nice little payoff for filling your yard. Some rares and mythics that might pull you into this deck include the Gitrog Ravenous Ride, which is a 5 mana 6/5 trample with haste and all sorts of additional upside. Smuggler's Surprise is a way to mill cards into your yard and even return a couple of them, and it also has plenty of modal abilities beyond that. And Vraska the Silencer can steal your opponent's dead creatures and turn them into treasures for you to use. Next up is Green-White, which is the archetype that cares the most about mounts, saddles, and vehicles. Our first signpost for this deck is Miriam Herd Whisperer, which is a creature that gives your mounts and vehicles hexproof on your turn and gives them counters when they attack. Congregation Gryph is a flying creature that grows while attacking saddled based on the number of mounts you control. Now there are plenty of mounts at common and uncommon in these colors, but a few of them to highlight here include Giant Beaver, which can grow the creatures that saddled it when it attacks. Bridled Bighorn is a 3/4 that can create 1/1s when it attacks while saddled. And Bounding Felidar permanently pumps up your whole team when it attacks while saddled. Some of the synergies that this archetype gives us access to include Frontier Seeker, which is a creature that can draw you another mount card or planes when it enters. Prosperity Tycoon is a high power creature that also creates a mercenary token, which will help pump the power of other creatures you control to saddle away. Intrepid Stablemaster is a mana dork that can add mana of any color to cast mount or vehicle spells. And Bristlepack Sentry is a 2 mana creature with 3 power that will likely be able to be used to saddle just about anything in the set. Some rares and mythics that might pull you into this archetype include Ornery Tumblewag, which has the incredible ability of giving you a counter every turn for no mana, but can also double those counters when it attacks while saddled. Wily Duke, a tin hero, is the perfect creature to saddle as it draws you a card every time it becomes tapped. And Fortune Loyal Steed can blink itself and other creatures for continued value when it attacks while saddled. Next up we have Blue-Green, which unfortunately doesn't look to be a very synergistic deck this time around, but rather apparently cares about casting big plot spells. Our first signpost uncommon is Doc Arlock, Grizzled Genius, which is a 2 mana creature that lets you plot cards for 2 fewer mana from your hand, and also cast cards from graveyard or exile for 2 fewer mana as well, a nice little mana bump. And we also have Make Your Own Luck, which lets you exile a card from the top 3 cards of your library and plot it and draw the other 2. Some nice card advantage and mana advantage. A few of the cards at common and uncommon that we might be interested in plotting in this deck include Outlaw Stitcher, which can plot for 5 mana and also give you 2/2s and additional counters when it enters if you manage to cast multiple spells that turn. Free Strider Commando plots for more mana than its mana cost, but can enter as a 5/5 if you did choose to plot it. And Tumbleweed Rising is a card that can create a creature as big as the biggest creature you control, but it also has plot. Some of the payoffs and synergies for this deck include Loan Shark, which can draw you a card when it enters if you've cast 2 or more spells this turn. Canyon Crab can loot on your end step if you spent your turn plotting. Emergent Haunting can become a 3/3 flyer if you decide to spend your turn using your mana to plot some spells. And Shackle Slinger can tap and put stun counters on creatures on the turns where you save up cards to double spell. Some rares and mythics to look out for in this archetype include Oko the Ringleader, because who doesn't love themselves a good Planeswalker in Limited? Bonnie Paul Clearcutter, which is a 6 mana 6/5 with reach that comes with another large creature and gives you card advantage whenever you attack with anything. And Fibblethip, Lost on the Range, lets you plot cards off of the top of your library, some nice card advantage for the deck. Next up is Blue-Black, which is a classic control deck this time around, but this time cares about committing crimes. Very on brand for control decks in Magic. Our first signpost uncommon for the deck is Lazav, Familiar Stranger, which can get counters whenever you commit crimes and then copy cards in graveyards after it does. And our other signpost is Intimidation Campaign, which replaces itself when it enters, drains your opponent for 1, and can bounce back to your hand whenever you commit a crime, an engine that is tough to put a stop to. Now, there are endless ways to commit crimes in this set, but I'll just highlight a few here, beginning with Stop Cold, which is Blue's aura-based removal spell for the set. Peerless Rope Master can bounce a tapped creature to its owner's hand, and if it's your opponent's, you've committed a crime. Binding Negotiation is a hand disruption spell that commits a crime. Consuming Ashes is a removal spell, which is committing a crime. And Desert Stew is yet another removal spell that commits a crime. This archetype also offers tons of payoffs for committing crimes at common and uncommon, beginning with Deep Muck Desperado, which could be a fun win condition in milling out your opponent if you commit enough crimes. Forsaken Miner can return itself to the battlefield whenever you commit a crime. Seize the Secrets is Divination that can cost only 2 mana if you've committed a crime. Raven of Fell Omens drains your opponent for 1 life every time you've committed a crime. And Nimble Brigand can become unblockable as you commit crimes and draw cards when it connects with your opponents. Some rares and mythics to keep an eye out for in this archetype include Duelist of the Mind that loots every time you commit a crime and grows its power with every card you draw. Gisa the Hellraiser creates 2 2/2s every single time you commit a crime, limited to only once each turn, and even grants those creatures bonus stats and menace, a true beating of a card. And Kervek the Punisher can give you a form of card advantage every time you commit a crime. Next up is Blue-Red, and this time it's not the classic spells deck, but rather cares about casting 2 spells in a single turn. Our first signpost uncommon to help us with this plan is Crom Violent Cacophony, which is a 2/3 flyer that draws you a card whenever you cast your second spell in a single turn. And we also have Slick Sequence, which deals 2 damage to any target, but also replaces itself if it's not the first spell you've cast this turn. The best way to enable double spelling is going to be through plot cards and cheap spells, so let's take a look at a few for the deck, including Take the Fall, which is just a 1 mana instant combat trick with upside. Slick Shot Lock Picker is a creature with plot that can also flash back a spell from your graveyard for a turn. Irascible Wolverine is a plot card that can give you impulsive card draw off the top of your deck. And Quick Draw is a 1 mana instant speed combat trick that could enable double spelling on your opponent's turn. A few of the payoffs for double spelling this often include Razzle Dazzler, which gets a counter and unblockable when you cast 2 spells. Lone Shark draws you a card when it enters if it's not the first spell you've cast this turn. Shackle Slinger can tap and stun creatures when you double spell. Brimstone Roundup gives you a mercenary token every time you double spell. And Iron Fist Pulverizer shocks your opponent and scries 1 every time you double spell. Some rares and mythics to keep an eye out for in this archetype include Breaches the Blast Maker, which can copy the second spell you cast each turn or deal damage to your opponent if you're willing to sacrifice an artifact. Slick Shot Show Off is a flying creature that gets a nice little power bonus with every non-creature spell you cast. And Malcolm the Eyes gives you a clue token with every second spell you cast each turn. Our last archetype for today's video is Black-White, which gets a theme that it's gotten before, but is usually reserved for Black-Red, and that is Sacrifice. Our first signpost uncommon to help us out here is Baron Bertram Greywater, which gives you vampire tokens every single time you make any other token, and can sacrifice those tokens to draw cards as well. And Ruthless Lawbringer lets you destroy any non-land permanent when it enters if you're willing to sacrifice another creature when it does. Let's take a look at some of the things that you will likely be sacrificing in the deck, beginning with Nezumi Linkbreaker, which is a 1 mana 1/1 that dies into another 1/1. That's 2 bodies for 1 card. Outlaw Medic draws you a card when it dies. Bridled Bighorn can pump out 1/1s that are fine bodies to sacrifice away for value. Lassoed by the Law is a removal spell that comes with a sacrificable 1/1 token. And Nurturing Pixie is a 1/1 flyer that can peck in for some damage early and be sacrificed later when it's no longer relevant. Some of the ways to enable and get paid off for all of this sacrificing include Vengeful Townsfolk, which grows every time a creature you control dies. Black Snag Buzzard can enter as a 3/2 flyer if a creature died this turn. Corrupted Conviction is a 1-mana way to sacrifice a creature to draw a couple of cards. Boneyard Desecrator can sacrifice other creatures to put counters on itself and potentially generate treasures. And Unscrupulous Contractor can sack a creature when it enters and draw you a couple of cards. Some rares and mythics to keep an eye out for in this archetype include Kembal Profiteering Mayor, which copies every token your opponent makes and drains them whenever you create tokens. Geese of the Hellraiser can create an army of sacrificable tokens in a hurry. And Pitiless Carnage can sacrifice any number of permanents you control to draw that many cards. Thanks so much for sticking around until the end of this video if you're still here. I'm always excited for the release of this video because I know it'll be very beneficial to have all of this information in one place so that you have an easy way to find what you need if you wish to revisit the video throughout the week. If you enjoyed this content, feel free to share it with a friend or two, as there's a decent chance they might as well. If you're already subscribed to the channel, thanks for being here today, and if you're not, go ahead and click that subscribe button to stay on top of set review season and have access to consistent high-quality drafts as soon as the set launches on Arena. Looks like that'll do it for this video, and I'll see you next time here at Daily Draft.